Algebra 1 skills number 26, linear graph characteristics. Okay, so we're going to look at some general line features and look at a couple examples here. So y equals 2x minus 1. We've already talked about how to graph this line. Just a quick review. If you're in slope-intercept form, you're going to take this -1. You're going to put that onto the y-axis here. Then you're going to treat this like a fraction, 2 over 1. You're going to go up 2 and over 1. And the standards talk about lots of characteristics of graphs. A lot of them really don't apply to lines. But we'll let this be kind of an introductory to some of the terms you're going to see and some of the future shapes. Some of these words will be more relevant to us. But one thing that is very relevant to lines are your intercepts. Y-intercept is -1, which you know from y equals mx plus b would just be this number. But you can physically see it here. It's where it crosses the y-axis. So the intercept itself is just the number -1, not the coordinate 0, -1. You can also find the y-intercept by placing 0 in for x that we talked about before with graphing lines. The x-intercept is 1/2, which you presume that by looking at the graph, and mathematically that works out. To find the x-intercept, you put 0 in for y. We didn't actually show that calculation here, but if you put 0 in for y, add 1, divide by 2, you get 1/2, which you can see there. So intercepts are very relevant to lines, and most lines have both an x and y intercept. Okay, increasing and decreasing is another term you hear. This line is increasing throughout. Now you read a graph like a book from left to right. So as you go up to the right, that means you're increasing. Okay, so then lines are only going to do one or the other. They're not going to change directions. Okay, your graph is positive when your x is greater than 1/2. That means positive is just simply above the x-axis. So your x-intercept's here at 1/2. When you're beyond that, to the right of 1/2, the graph is positive. That is, you have positive y values. Meanwhile, you're negative, the opposite of that, when you're less than 1/2, when your y coordinates are below the x-axis. Other words you hear, the same equation, same graph. Symmetry. Now, symmetry really doesn't apply to lines. And we'll talk about symmetry again later with other shapes. Relative maximums, again, that would just be kind of like a high point. And there is no relative maximum here. It just keeps going up. Relative minimum, same thing. These words will apply more later. In behavior, you hear that word. And there is, when you get to polynomials, especially in Algebra 2, this becomes more relevant. But you may see something like rises to the right and falls to the left. Just be aware that in behavior is sometimes used for graphs. And again, for lines, it's just going to tell you which way it's going. Domain and range. Now, we will spend more time on this later as well. But for lines, it's kind of boring. Your domain and range for most lines, the only exception would be a vertical or horizontal line. But for every oblique line, your domain and range is all real numbers. In short, domain means all the x's that are covered, and range is all the y's that are covered. But again, we'll talk more about that later from a graphical standpoint. But all real numbers for all lines. And rate of change, that's consistent with your slope, which you can either just simply look in the equation, there's slope of 2, or you can take any point and count up or down and over. So go up 2 and over to the right 1. That's, again, 2 over 1 is 2. That's your rate of change. Sometimes you hear it be called average rate of change, which for a line, the average rate of change, well, that's going to be the same as your rate of change because it's always the same for a line. Okay, one more example. Y equals -2/3 x plus 4. So you might remember that a negative slope is going to go down to the right. So going through the same list, y-intercept is 4, which you can just simply look here, or if you prefer, put 0 in for x and solve. X-intercept is 6, which actually runs off the page. You can't see that here. You know it's going to be shortly after 5. But if you put a 0 in for y and solve for x, you'll get 6. Graph is decreasing throughout. Remember, you read left to right, so it's going down. It's positive when x is less than 6. Again, you can't quite see where it intersects, but what you're looking at is always positive. To be positive means you're above the x-axis. It has nothing to do with the y-axis. You're going to be negative when you get beyond 6, which again, you can't see here. Okay, same graph, same equation. No symmetry. Again, we don't really say that for a line, nor do we say anything about maximums or minimums. In behavior, this one rises to the left and falls to the right. which again, just kind of common sense looking at it. Domain and range, again, if it's an oblique or slanted line, it's always going to be all real numbers. More on that later. And your rate of change, again, is your negative 2/3. Down 2, which you can count from here, down 2 over 3. It's a little bit about general line features.